the considerations that have been raised earlier here, clear expectations for world religions, foreign language options, and board-approved explicit phonics reading and writing and math instructional programs, that the board allow for the 2019-20 school year, or actually moving forward from today, 2019-20 school year, to be transition time for our districts and teachers, to be implemented in the classroom by 2020-2021 school year, and that this motion be decided by a roll call vote of this board.
Going to seek some clarification here. That's not exactly as on the agenda, so I'm just looking for some legal. We have a motion.
Dr. Core, members of the board, Kim Anderson.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Kim?
Mr. Vice President, I'm not quite understanding your question. This is an item on the agenda, and a board member is free to make a motion with regard to that item.
Okay, it was just with greater specificity than is on the agenda. So it's okay as the motion stands. Thank you. Do I have a second? Hearing a lack of a second, I would look for a motion to approve the Arizona History and Social Science Standards and the revised Arizona Science Standards with the ASTA revisions.
So moved.
Member Burton? Member Mack? Any discussion?
Dr. Core.
Member Taylor?
I'd like to have some discussion on this if we can.
Of course, yeah.
So a couple of things. Superintendent's words were very important, and I think there's a lot of merit in looking at a menu approach.
Can you speak up, please?
Okay, thank you. Is this better?
Thank you.
Okay, my mother always told me that I didn't talk loud enough, so.
My mother never told me that,
actually. She told me I talked too much, but it wasn't loud enough. Thank you. The idea of a menu is, I think, a time that is fastly approaching. It might not be right now, but the whole idea that was just laid out that we should have choices, I think, is a very, very important topic that this board needs to take up at a future meeting, maybe not right now. Maybe there's an opportunity to have a motion that includes both, right? I believe in statute it does allow a menu of standards today. And the reason why I think that makes a lot of sense is because we have a menu of assessment in place, right? So there's accountability regardless of the sets of standards that might be in a state repertoire, right? So that's why the motion that came forward, I didn't necessarily second because it doesn't give the choice that I believe would benefit the state unless it included some of the work that has been done by so many educators, and we heard for the last couple hours. Notwithstanding that, just to address the motion that's before us today, there's a couple of things that, as I look at these standards, that I think there's some wonderful things. Let me just start there, right? Number one, that we've included financial literacy is a pretty big deal. Nationally, that's pretty well known is needed, and we're one of the first states to really get serious about it. I think people should be applauded for including that. I don't think they're all perfect, but I think this is a huge step forward, and it'll benefit our students big time. The emphasis on primary standards, I think, are also good. Some of the other learning modalities that are being emphasized, I think, are good as well. Now, notwithstanding some of the strengths, there are some there's some things that I think still need work for me to feel comfortable supporting the motion as it stands. And I would like to see us take some more time to do it. Number one, let me just remind everyone, we have great scholars and students all across our state, and they're getting into some of the highest universities and colleges with lots of scholarships every year. So I don't see that we have a huge sensitivity or urgency to get it done right now, okay? There's some great things that are going on. Does it need to happen? Yeah, it does need to happen. But for me, it's about quality, and it's not about, well, it's 5 years, let's change the standards, right? We should be driven by quality, not a calendar. Okay, so that's where really I'm coming from is, are these the highest quality standards that we possibly can look at? We talked about, superintendent is right. The science standards largely came from Next Gen Science, which are rated C, right? I think they were improved, by Fordham. I think they were improved on a little bit, but I don't know that they are the best that we have at this point in time for our students. Maybe they are, but I'm not sure that they have, and I don't know that we have a lot of data that shows. I think there's some good thought going in, but when you put a plane in the air, you better have taken a lot of test flights, right? You don't take a poll of the engineers who drew the plans up and say, well, they all believe it's going to fly. You send that thing through lots of testing, and both of these standards have good ideas put into it and excellent minds, but it hasn't flown, right? We haven't seen that it's really going to move the dial. And the last couple rounds of standards reviews have taken that same approach. Very popular, lots of tailwind to it, but they haven't flown, and we haven't seen it move the dial. And we get frustrated when we see these NAEP scores, and it just kind of wobbles, right? And it's been flatlining that for decades, really, when you look at it. So that's one thing that I think in the board's best interest is to make sure that we know these things are really going to move the dial in terms of history and science learning. So a couple of things I think also need to be cleaned up. As much as we've seen these slides about standards and curriculum, there's still lots of curriculum in the proposed history and science standards. And I'll give you some examples. The time frames, right? That's a curriculum element, right? And that's really a bias to a 5-day school. We have a lot of 4-day schools in Arizona as well that may or may not actually be able to hit those. And I don't want them to think that they're out of compliance because the people put it together for a 5-day school calendar. There's things like modeling. There's real heavy emphasis on inquiry and modeling. And while some of those modalities are good, if it's not done with an excellent teacher that really knows what they're doing, it's a big downside, right? And so that's curriculum in nature anyways. Why are we putting that in here as an emphasis for everyone to say this is the way you have to do it? Well, no, you don't. Direct instruction could work as well, depending on the talent level of the teacher. Everyone hasn't gone through an extensive amount of modeling instruction, and this could mean a big fiscal requirement as well for the districts. Well, if we're all doing modeling, now we all have to go, spend a bunch of money to tool up, right? But if we could just remove some of those curricular elements and let the local LEAs address that, I think that would clear up and focus it on what standards documents should be, which is about standards. Let me get a little specific into science and then talk about history as well, where I think science could use a little bit more improvement. We talked about the scientific method. When it came in the spring and they said the scientific method is de-emphasized, I made a couple of phone calls. I talked to some engineers that are on some of the most cutting-edge artificial intelligence, augmented reality tools that are going into very high-end vehicles, also military applications. I talked to a research scientist that helped found some of the genome work that's been done here in Phoenix. I mean, one of the top 20 people walking the planet that could make, anything out of DNA that's known to man, right? And other people in Silicon Valley. And I said, all right, how much is this scientific method used in your body of work? And they said, I said, because they're kind of de-emphasizing it in these standards, and is that really what's happening or not? And he says, not only is it used every day, it's the most rigorous standard that we have. Not that there aren't other engineering tools, but the scientific method is still the gold standard. It's still the most rigorous. The scientist actually added an interesting comment. He says, in my field, there are people that are de-emphasizing the scientific method, but it's because they don't want the rigor so they can fudge the data to keep the federal funds going for grants or to prove a particular point. whether it's a political point or some other point. He says that scientific method is the gold standard in science. Not that there isn't value in all these others, but if you're de-emphasizing that with your students, you're really not lining them up to be successful in the highest levels of rigor in science and engineering. And the engineers said the exact same thing, just in engineering language. Okay, so to me, we need to re-enthrone the best of science, because that's what the industry is telling me from talking to some of the best. And I think that's one of the things. There's a couple of other things. When we talk about K3, a big thing for me in the last ELA in math was age appropriateness. And I agreed, and I cited many times, people got sick of this, but there were 500 of our best thinkers, medical professionals, child psychologists, development specialists. They pulled a full-page article in the New York Times saying Common Core standards are not age appropriate. And that's really at K3, right? One of the major points they hit was you're asking them to do a lot of conceptual work and their brains aren't ready for it. I got a second grader, so I see some of this in her math problems right now. She doesn't like math because she struggles with it, because they're asking her to do some algebraic work. She's not ready for it. She's 7, right? And it's not just my example. We've heard all the tears at the table stories. Well, some of those elements are still here, right? We're asking them to do a lot of conceptual work in the K3 space on science under the guise of more rigor. Well, more rigor doesn't mean appropriate. And so that's some additional work on the science space that I think. There's some other things in there that I think are great, but to support the science work, I think we need to address at least those two things, which is the scientific method, age-appropriate standards for the K3. And I see what happened is we did in the same thing happened. We said with teacher assistants, we just added that as a way to say, well, the standard is okay because teachers are going to assist. Well, of course they are at school, right? But are they going to be able to assist on an assessment? Well, not really. So that's science. Let me just touch on history real quick. I'm sympathetic to the elementary school teachers that I've talked to that don't like the study of Arizona moving from 4 to 3. There's a couple of good points that they make, and I think we need to keep it at 4, because one of the points that they made is, hey, when our 4th graders go out and tour Yellowstone or go back east and maybe see Independence Hall or something, there's specific programming for the 4th graders, and now they're 3rd graders, and they're kind of not fitting into what the union's offering here in our national park system or other things that are nationally available for our 4th graders. And they wanted them to kind of be able to plug into some of the national programming. They thought that was important. I'm sympathetic to that argument. You've heard me say a couple of times that I don't like grade level articulation. Some schools can go faster than others. I think if we want to put it out there as a recommendation, but allow schools, or maybe banded, I'm more open to that. But if we say they have to do this, schools know how to progress. I think that's an important research element that was carried into these discussions. But let's let the LEAs figure that out for their particular student body instead of us dictating it, because one size doesn't fit all, right? Schools can go faster than others, and let them do it. Right? So grade level articulation is something that I'm not supportive of. Now, let me just sum up here a little bit as I started with, we talked about Hillsdale, certainly open to that discussion. There's some strengths in there that I think are very valid. And the superintendent outlined some very, very important points. If we put that in a context of a menu and put this together as a repertoire of standards that go forward, I think that's a valid discussion to have. Maybe we're not ready for that motion right now. Maybe we're ready in December or January. But I think to give a state like Arizona, that's a school choice state, the chance to say, hey, here's some of the best thinking of some of the teachers that we have, but here's also some great standards as well. Why would we want to deprive our students of more than one excellent set of standards that's out there. And if there's concerns on establishment cases as things, let's have the AG come in and look at that. And the superintendent outlined a couple things that probably should be looked at in those Barney standards and modified or moved around, moved to appendices as well. I think that's a valid discussion to have. So as we look at terms of this initial motion, not supportive of that until we really get these show ready, but would love to see us continue to work on some of those areas, and I'd love to hear some of the other discussion from some of the other board members on that. But I think that would be a great thing for our state to have some great choices in front of them. And thank you for the time.
Thank you, Member Taylor. Any other discussion?
Mr. Vice President?
Member Wellborn,
I'd like
yes,
to make
please.
comments. Member Taylor, I really appreciate your comments and respect the basis from which you're coming from on this. I have to tell you, not being an educator, I really have to defer to those who are experts in this field to advise me and educate me about, what are the right standards to have and what role they need to serve. So I have to share that it's disturbing to me that we've spent all these hundreds of hours and hundreds of people in a process to develop new standards in different areas, and then have them come before us ready for approval with some glaring holes or issues according to your background and also the superintendent's. How can we move forward with a different process that would be a better suited for this board to consider? What should we have done to change the process by how we do this? And so why are we faced with a dilemma about whether to approve them now or send them back for further review?
Member Taylor?
Mr. Vice President, well, that's exactly why I brought up in our retreat. I wanted to review the process because I didn't see that it was giving inclusion to some people. We heard from some parents, right? Their feedback wasn't, although it was submitted on time, why didn't it flow through? Why didn't they see those comments flow through? I'm not totally sure because I don't know how the process totally worked. Back in the spring, I said, I'd like to see a list of everyone involved because I might want to call and make some follow-up calls. I'd like to see that. I never really got that. We talked about in the spring, and this is just my perspective, my concern about grade level articulation. So I'm not sure why when we as board members have expressed concerns or requested data, we haven't got that. I can't explain that, but that's exactly why I wanted to bring the standards review process back up, get a lot of community input, and make sure that it's all something that we can stand behind so we're not, where we are today.
Any other questions or comments? Superintendent Douglas.
Well, and I'd like to comment to Member Wellborn's questions. I mean, it's kind of interesting to me in a way. I mean, when I came on the board, the department was just completing several groups of standards, and I won't remember exactly what they are right now. I think it was the arts, maybe some foreign languages, PE, several areas. And then we went into the repeal and replacement of Common Core. And that process was not the department's prior process. So it was mandated, and basically the whole process was set up by the governor's staff and the then State Board of Ed staff, not the same people who are involved now, and it was very much dictated and driven exactly how many people who would be involved, how they would do things, and it was very unlike what we had done in the past. So really, as strange as it may seem, even after almost 4 years, this is the first time I've been able to go through this process. The concern, parents coming up or anyone, well, first of all, we do, and I'm not knocking anybody, but really the reality is we say when it came to working groups, it was very inclusive of teachers and I would say higher ed is very fair. I think when we looked at the working groups between March and now, I think in science we only had 1 or 2 community members. We really didn't have community members coming forward. But that doesn't mean when people make public comments, they aren't included, that those weren't talked about and considered. I don't think we have a document that says this, every public comment that was made is available on the department's website, so you can read every single comment that was made. But that doesn't mean when there was a recommendation made that we said this particular person said this and wants this to happen. As a matter of fact, as we went through the process with the Common Core standards, I heard it both ways. And again, all due respect to community members, but oh my gosh, our comments weren't incorporated. And then on the other hand, oh my gosh, you gave you mentioned my name in a document. So which is it? Do you want credit for the comment you made or not? And I don't mean you, obviously. I mean the editorial you. So I can assure you all those things were taken into consideration. It's just this is a very tough subject. I don't know how to track it any better than it was or to make anything more public. I will say that while certainly, and we'll see what happens in the future, obviously it'll be the board's decision, but the board sets policy. The board does not do the day-to-day work. So I can't speak for whomever the future superintendent might be, but I would think the board to try to micromanage exactly how the department tries to set standards, inputs, but before these standards were started, when it was currently the 2004-2005 standards are still in place. Before they were even opened, it was started with public comment. That public comment, every which bit of it was taken, and as far as I know, every bit of it, I believe, is up on our website. I'm getting the shakes of the head, yes. And then they created draft standards. And yes, I did do an internal review of them. I make no bones about it. A lot of what has been said about that was absolutely incorrect, false, to this day. Comments there, again, just for the record, I'll say it, there is no creationism, there is no intelligent design in those standards whatsoever, and more evolution than there is in the standards that we're using right now. So we did do some internal review solely in the effort to beef up what, again, in my opinion, are very vague, very ambivalent type of work, and no disrespect to anybody, but again, as I said, they can be anything to anybody, anywhere, any way they want them to be. But then we created the draft standards after more work, and they were released in March for yet more public comment. More public comment was received. That public comment went back to the working groups. And then finally, what was created was what was before you today. I'm not sure how much different that process can be. We've begged from beginning to end for more and more community members. Personally, I think we've had absolutely inadequate input from our parents and our community. I've said it before, I'll say it again. The education system belongs to the parent, belongs to the community. It is to serve them. They should be telling us what they expect and what they need for their children's education, and not being told what will be put upon them by whether it be solely the voice of educators, whether it be solely the voice of the Chamber of Commerce or industry or whatever it may be. I mean,
Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you.
Mr. Vice President, can I make a comment?
Yeah, please.
So I think Member Taylor brings up some valid points. Again, my concern is what's the solution? I mean, how do we know that the issues that have been raised today might get a second look? Where's the leadership coming from? I'm not sure where leadership should come from. I'm hearing two sides of this. One side that there was plenty of public opinion and opportunities for it, and yet, in your case, you didn't feel that you were getting that, your concerns listened to. So if there's a vote that says we're not ready, as you suggested, to delay, there needs to be some consideration as to what happens next so that we don't come back here in 3 more months and still have issues with it. So I don't know what the process should be. I just know that if we're going to delay, we need to do something different.
Any other discussion before we call the vote? Member Mack, it seemed like you were.
Thank you, Vice President Gore, members of the board. I would like to go back to the motion that's on the table and maybe see where we are. And then as far as the process and having in the past been involved in the process, and I know we voted on the process as a board 2 years ago and then previously in previous cycles as well. So I just wonder if we could just move ahead and revisit that motion that was on the table.
We absolutely can. I just want to be respectful of everyone, make sure that any discussion is had. So just for clarity, I will reiterate that we have a motion and a second to approve the Arizona History and Social Science Standards and the revised Arizona Science Standards with the ASTA revisions. Given the fact that we have 3 members by phone and the importance of this issue, I would ask that we have a roll vote, if that would be possible.
Yes. Member Baker?
Yes.
Member Broussard? Member Broussard?
Sorry about that. Yes. And can I hear the motion one more time just to...
The motion... Member Broussard, the motion on the table is to approve the Arizona History and Social Science Standards and the revised Arizona Science Standards with the ASTA revisions.
Nay.
Member Burton?
Aye.
Dr. Chang? Superintendent Douglas?
No.
Member Kay?
Yes.
Member Mack?
Yes.
Member Taylor?
No.
Member Wellborn?
No.
Dr. Kaur?
Yes.
President Narducci?
With due respect to both Superintendent Douglas and Member Taylor, I vote yes.
Dr. Kaur, President Narducci, with a vote of 6-4, the motion passes.
Thank you. All right. Well, we will move back to 5A for a presentation, discussion, and possible action to approve the Arizona Computer Science Standards. Director Williams. Do folks need a break? I'm sorry. I should have. Are we? Okay. I just got some eye contact that a break might be called for at this point. So shall we take a 10-minute break, and when we'll come back, we will start with 5A Computer Science Standards. Thank you.
To your point,
All right, I'm going to call us back into session and as someone who has taught college courses for many, many years, I realize there's never been a 10-minute break in the history of 10-minute breaks. But members will wander back in and join us in progress. But in sake of moving us along in respect of everyone else, we will move on back to the general session 5A, presentation, discussion, and possible action to approve Arizona computer science standards. Please.
Thank you, Vice President Corr, Superintendent Douglas, members of the board. I am Jonathan Moore. Presenting with me, again, is my colleague, Sarah Sleesman, who's our Director of Science, STEM, and Computer Science. We also have joining us Carl Graffor. He is an instructor of cybersecurity at Cochise County Community College and also is a consultant who worked with us on the development of these standards. We'll give you a brief overview and we'll be sensitive to time, and so there'll be an opportunity at the end for any questions based on information that may not have been shared. Just to give you a brief history of how the development of these standards came to be, during the 2017 legislative session, the governor's office received an appropriation from the legislature in the amount of $200,000. Through a partnership with the governor's office, we received a portion of that money to allow us to develop these standards. We'll bypass those things which you've heard from previous presentations. I do just want to highlight the number of educators, over 60 representing 8 counties and 41 school districts. I'll now turn it over to Sarah, who will give us a brief walkthrough of the research base behind the standards.
Hello. So to give you a research base, that this was research based, there was these 3 areas that we were using. We were looking at these resources to develop the standards. We used the K through 12 Computer Science Teachers Association standards. We used the states of Nevada and Virginia while also using the K-12 framework as a guide. And the framework was created for standards development. Hello.
Hello.
So it is important for you to note that the Arizona computer science standards are written by grade level, as that's what we were asked to do, as contrast from many other states that are written in grade bands. Here are the themes from our public comment. I'll let you go ahead and read the themes, but I want to go ahead and note 2 of them that are most prevalent. One is that there's limited time to teach computer science standards. Yes, there is that limited time, but you can teach this as a standalone course, or it can also be interwoven as appropriate into the content with other areas. The other one we heard a lot about was that it was too narrow or too broad or too lengthy. We had a lot of different comments on that. It wasn't one or the other. Take a moment to look at our technical reviewers. The overarching theme from those technical reviewers was with these standards will enhance the opportunities for students to solve problems, think critically and computationally, and prepare them for the future. Looking at here is our key themes from our technical review. I think the biggest one to look at is the last one, is the requirement for implementing the standards. That I've seen numerous of times. This question comes up frequently. The standards, while they are not mandatory, they are expected to contribute to the increase in the number of computer science classes offered in Arizona schools. These standards will offer districts and a framework or that foundation that they need to integrate computer science into their curriculum, as proposed to starting this more in kindergarten level, working up through middle school through high school. So they're more exposed to that idea of computer science. So here are the 5 different essential concepts in computer science, and underneath you'll see the sub-concepts that go along with the computer science. Keep going.
And here we can see that there are the essential concepts and the practices that are really married together. It's what is the concept they're doing and how are they doing it together. And Carl will go over more of what those essential concepts are for you.
Good afternoon, Vice President Corr, members of the board. My name is Carl Graffor. I'm a computer information systems instructor at Cochise College, specifically cybersecurity. So moving through, this just shows you really quickly the way that we've actually outlined the standards. The first is the grade level, second section is the actual essential concept, the third portion is the sub-concept, and then the standard number being the fourth concept. Next, please. As you can see, this is what they'll actually look like, 8th grade and high school, difference being these are the exact same standard. They cover the same sub-concept. So the standards are different, but that's because they're at different levels. We're going to talk really quickly about computing systems. Again, the 3 sub-concepts underneath it, devices, hardware, and hardware and software, and troubleshooting. I'll let you read through real quick. And again, in the interest of time, we're going to move through quickly, but if you have any questions, please. Next. Networks and the internet, and the 2 sub-concepts up underneath, network communication organization and cybersecurity. Data analysis, and again, the 3 underneath it, collection, visualization, and transformation of data, storage, and inference models. Algorithms and programming, and the 5 sub-concepts underneath, algorithms, variables, control, modularity, and program development. And impacts of computing, and the 3 underneath that, culture, social interactions, and safety, law, and ethics. Connections to other disciplines. As Sarah has already mentioned, it's not expected or in any way intended to make this a mandatory computer science class or course in anywhere, as it can be taught, and it should be connected with other disciplines. If it's not, it's again, it's something we don't have time to force as a standalone class. So if you weave it in most specifically into math and science is where I tend to place mine when I was doing this in middle school. Next, please. And how do we teach computer science? And this was a concern that's come up more than once, is what if a school doesn't have the capacity or the technological capacity to actually teach it? Plugged and unplugged versions. Unplugged, it's where I would actually start anyway. Implementation, next steps. Are you going?
Thank you, Carl.
Yes, sir.
So regarding implementation and next steps, we would like to begin implementation during the 2021 school year. And what that support would include would be robust professional development provided by the department. We would also seek to bring in computer science experts from a variety of entities. Just a couple of those that are listed, Computer Science for Arizona. We're co-sponsoring a PD week. Where we will be bringing in various providers and open it up with the goal to have as little to no cost for teachers to participate in as possible. So the framework for that is essentially a week of professional development that teachers can apply and engage in. They can come as teams, they can come as individuals, they can come as beginners or experts. CS for All script training. We went through a workshop, myself and my colleagues, earlier this summer. And what the script rubric is it's a tool that allows districts to be able to systematically look at computer science implementation. So if you are a school district that has yet to begin or yet to accelerate or expand computer science, this PD will provide you with a tool where you and your colleagues can actually look at systemically how do we implement computer science, from staffing to resources to funding, all of those mechanisms. And then we will provide as traditional webinars and guidance documents as well related to the standards.
Any questions for staff? Member Taylor.
Thank you. Thanks for pulling this together. Talk to me a little bit about the flexibility schools have. I think that's one of the strengths here. Is it, when I talk to engineers, software guys, and say, what do you think? They say, oh, it's too high level. And I kind of see that as a strength. They thought it as a criticism, but it gives them some flexibility. But somebody just wanted to have, or they just have resources for a Java programming class, are they going to be crosswise here with that, or is the flexibility will allow them to be specific or to whatever their ability to resource?
That's a great question. Vice President Core Member Taylor, members of the board. So in terms of flexibility, one of the key things to note is that these standards were also created with our colleagues from CTE. And so when we start to look at, one, the specificity in terms of being able to take these standards and build actual courses, that's one of the next items we'll work on in terms of implementation. How do these standards potentially crosswalk to CTE courses? And also how can schools or districts that currently offer CTE courses map these particular standards? So that's one. In terms of the other side of that, excuse me, my apologies, lost my train of thought. Could you repeat your question, please?
Just the ability for schools to be very point or...
Yes. And so another aspect of the standards is given how they were written, they allow for them to be connected to various content areas. And so we know that in middle school or just even within K-8, it can be quite difficult to have a standalone course. And so if you're still looking to have students develop in this area, the standards work nicely with being able to incorporate with whether it's math or science or even ELA. So it allows for whatever the range is.
No, that's great, and I appreciate you bringing up CTE because that's something that I've pushed on this area is making sure that the field knows that this could be an alternate fourth math credit, and maybe that's could be part of that as well as how meaningful the math needs to be in this and part of the training for that to be. I think that's a very valuable entry there. So I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Member Mack?
Vice President Core, members of the board, I'd like to move that the state board approve the Arizona computer science standards.
I have a motion. I'm going to, by a whisker, give that one to Member Burton on the second, but with extra credit for Member Baker. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you very much. Nicely done. Moving on to 5C, which is the presentation, discussion, and possible action to close rulemaking procedures for the following: emergency administration of auto-injectable epinephrine, emergency administration of inhalers, and governing school district and non-exempt charter school procurement. Director Williams.
Vice President Core, members of the board, Ketcher Baden, Deputy Director. Ketcher Baden is available if board members have any questions. Otherwise, I would recommend just moving it to a motion.
Thank you, Director Williams. Any questions? Hearing none, I'll...
Member Broussard?
Yes, please go ahead, Member Broussard.
I just wanted to thank Mr. Baden for following up on my request and convening those. That would be helpful in securing those prescriptions, I guess, for the epinephrine and the inhalers. So I appreciate your work on that. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Noted. Thank you. So I believe I am looking for a motion. Member Taylor, and a second. Thank you.
Vice President Core,
The wording.
he would have to state the motion.
Oh.
Mr. Vice
By all
President,
means, Member Taylor.
I move that we close rulemaking procedures for R72809, emergency administration of auto-injectable epinephrine. Close rulemaking procedures for R72810, emergency administration of inhalers, and close rulemaking procedures for R72103, R72104, R72114, R72193, R7211112, governing school districts and non-exempt charter school procurement.
Second.
And Member K gets the easy part. A second from Member K. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We'll move on to 5D, presentation, discussion, and possible action to open rulemaking procedures on R7-2-201 and R7-2-206 regarding certification denial appeals for applications that do not involve allegations of immoral or unprofessional conduct. Director Williams.
Vice President Core, members of the board, do any of the board members have any questions in regard to this agenda item? Then I would suggest a motion then, Dr. Core.
Fantastic. Then I am open to a motion on this item.
I would move that we open rulemaking procedures on R7-2-201 and R7-2-206 regarding certification denial appeals for applications that do not involve allegations of immoral or unprofessional conduct.
Member Mack, thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Member Kate, thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. Move on to 5E, amended presentation, discussion, and possible action to approve the scope and work for the menu of assessments request for proposal. Director Williams.
Vice President Core, member, Superintendent Douglas, members of the board, if the board would like to discuss the scope of work for the RFP for the menu of assessments, then we would need a motion to go into executive session. If the board feels as if they're okay with the scope and does not need to discuss the scope, then you could have a motion to approve the scope and direct the Department of Education to release the RFP. So those are your two options.
Very good. Member Taylor.
There is something that I think is missing that I think we need to have in there. So if that takes an E-session, I'm more than happy to make that motion. If not, happy to talk about it here. Okay. So I moved it that we go to E-session to talk about the scope of work.
Okay.
Excuse me, just some clarification.
Yep,
the E-session is based on ARS 38431.03A2, which allows the board to convene an executive session to consider records exempt by law from public inspection, including the receipt and discussion of information that's required to be maintained as confidential by state or federal law.
Thank you. Thank you. So I have a motion from Member Taylor, and we'll need a second to move into executive session.
Second.
Member Baker seconds. All in favor of moving to executive session, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, then I think I'm supposed to close. Do folks on the phone know how to?
So Dr. Core, members of the board, President Narducci and Member Broussard who are on the phone, you will have to hang up, and then we'll call back in using the executive session conference room phone. And we will be back momentarily.
Thank you.
Take a roll call.
playing out there? Probably not.
us back into regular session. And
Code is confirmed. When you hear the tone, you will be the...
All right, we'll hold on just a second while I just got a thumbs up. Thank you. So at this point, I will seek a motion for the board to direct the department to investigate those issues discussed in executive session, finalize the request for proposal, and release the request for proposal to the public.
So moved.
Member Taylor?
Second.
Member Mack, thank you. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. Excellent. We will move on to item 6, and once again have a call to the public. This is the time for the public to comment on those items on enforcement action consent items. Director Williams, do we have any such requests to speak?
Vice President Corr, Superintendent Douglas, members of the board, no calls to the public were received for item 6.
Thank you. Then I will move on to item 7, the consent agenda itself, and I would seek a motion to approve items 7A, 1 through 6, and 7B, 1 through 3.
So moved.
Member Mack?
Second.
Member Taylor? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you very much. And we will once again issue a call to our dwindling public, and this time is for the public to comment on items on the general session of enforcement actions. Director Williams, do we have any such requests to speak?
We do not.
Fair enough. Then I will move on to item 7. And Director Williams?
Vice President Corr, members of the board, if no board member would like information on the negotiated settlement agreements, then I would suggest taking them all as you typically do.
Does anyone like to discuss anything? If not, I will seek a motion to approve items 9A, 1 through 3.
So moved.
Member Taylor?
Second.
Was that Member
Burton?
Burton? Okay, good. Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. Motion carries. Item 9B. Do I have a motion to adopt the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and recommendations of the PPAC and revoke the teaching certificate of Nida Mankata, and that all states and territories be so notified?
So moved.
Member Mack and Member Taylor, a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Moving on to item 9C, and I seek a motion to adopt the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and recommendation of the PPAC to deny the application for certification of Benjamin Carrillo with the condition that he be prohibited from reapplying for a period of 3 years, and that all states and territories be so notified.
So moved.
Member Taylor?
Second.
Member Mack? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, motion carries. I'll move on to 9D, and I will seek a motion to adopt the findings of fact, conclusion of law, and recommendations of the PPAC to deny the application for certification of Ryan Van Loo with the condition that he be prohibited from reapplying for a period of 1 year, and that all states and territories be so notified. Member Taylor? Member Baker? Any discussion? Superintendent Douglas?
Yeah, I thought, certainly I agree with the denial, but I thought not reapplying for 1 year seemed, in light of this record, very light. I mean, if I understand this, it's not been that long since he's been released. And one of the rhetorical questions I made note was, I can't help but wonder if he were to apply again in a year and get through the process, are parents entitled to know of this past criminal history?
Any other discussion? Member Kay?
Vice President Corr, Superintendent Douglas, I had some similar concerns with this one. I really felt, although it had been some time since the offenses and the incarceration, I really did struggle with the 1 year. There was some discussion, I believe, in the at the PPAC meeting about restitution not being fully paid. So there's part of me that would like to see this be longer in terms of the denial, and perhaps something with restitution tied to it. And I had the same concern about families. You know, as a parent, it was quite disturbing to me to think that, you know, had I known, if this were my child and my child were sitting in this individual's classroom, I likely wouldn't keep them there.
Mr. Vice President, just
Taylor.
with respect to that, if Member Kay wants to make an amendment to the time frame, I would be supportive of that. That we can move an amended motion.
Member Kay?
Superintendent Douglas? Sorry.
What is the longest that we can deny reapplication?
Vice President Corr, Superintendent Douglas, the State Board of Education can deny up to 5 years.
Because even as I look at what he studied, with all due respect, I don't see where the fit in the classroom, quite frankly. So I would amend the motion that he may not reapply for 5 years, if that would be accepted.
Second.
Amended motion by Superintendent Douglas that has been seconded by Member Taylor.
Vice President Corr, there was a motion on, the motion was made by Member Taylor for the 1 year denial. It was seconded by Member Baker. So if Member Taylor is amending his motion, that the amended motion of a 5 year denial would need to be seconded by Member Baker.
Okay.
And also, excuse me, also, Mr.
Yep,
President,
please.
members of the board, if you're going to be making changes to the recommendation, it would be helpful for the record to reflect the basis for those changes in the event it's challenged.
Okay. So, for more so than has been just. No, and they've done that. Member Baker has, and council has indicated that it would be helpful to indicate the basis for making that motion in case it's challenged. No.
And they were making the amendments.
Do I have that right, Ms. Anderson? For the record, you would like some indication as to why the amendment is being made.
As to why the recommendation is moving from 1 year to 5 years.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, but it's still my motion to amend, correct? Or are we just going to ask Mr. Taylor to make his motion 5 years?
You can either, if it's your motion to amend, the board would have to vote on amending the motion, or the motion can be withdrawn and restated.
I mean, I'll support Mr. Taylor I'll withdraw my amendment if you would like to amend yours and chime in with any support you need.
Is that okay with you?
Absolutely. So at this point, just for clarity, we are looking for Member Taylor and Member Baker to withdraw their initial motion, and then it will go back with a period of 5 years.
Vice President Corr, why don't we do that to make it real clean?
Yep,
so
exactly.
We'll withdraw.
Yes, withdrawn.
Member Taylor has withdrawn his motion, and the second from Mr. Baker has also, Member Baker has also been withdrawn. And now we have a motion. I will seek a motion, and I'll start this from the start for clarity. Do I have a motion to adopt the findings of fact, conclusion of law, and alter the recommendation of the PPAC to deny the application for certification of Ryan Van Loo with the condition that he be prohibited from reapplying for a period of 5 years and that all states and territories be so notified. Do I have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Member Taylor and Superintendent Douglas. Now any discussion?
Mr. Vice President?
Yes.
The motion is extended to 5 years based on the extensive history that's concerning the board as noted in the public documents before us.
Thank you. All right, I am ready to call a vote. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. Moving on to 9E. And once again, I seek a motion to adopt the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and recommendation of the PPAC to suspend the teaching certificate of Sonia Harper, as well as deny Sonia Harper's application for certification with the condition that she be prohibited from reapplying for a period of 4 years and that all states and territories be so notified. Do I have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Member Kay, do I have a second?
Second.
Member Taylor, any discussion? Okay, hearing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed?
I'll vote nay only because I think that this one should have been 5 years also.
Noted. Thank you. We're moving on to item 10, future meeting dates, current events. Board members, Director Williams, anything to share with this? Member Baker.
Yes. I'd like to just, for the public record, state that I'm not sure all school districts realize that that none of us know what target we're going to shoot for academically next year. We've been having a lot of data digs with our schools and with schools across the state, and examining data to figure out what we have to do to our instructional practices in order to improve student performance. But actually, all those efforts are not completely for naught, but if the test is going to be completely different than the test before, A, we might be shooting at the wrong target, and B, since the test is going to be different, we won't have a way of measuring whether or not we did make an improvement or did not make an improvement. So I think that needs to be clarified, and I think we also need to look very hard at that reality and see if there's a way that we can escape. It's nice to offer people choice, but it's not good to force disruption on every single system, especially if they don't want the disruption. The second thing I want to state for the public record is that we are proceeding with bids and other actions to offer a menu of assessments at grades 3 through 8, yet we continue to get indication that ESSA will not allow that. And I believe it's incumbent upon us as responsible adults of the education system to get that issue resolved rather than to just continue on two separate tracks as if that significant difference did not exist. And again, we owe that not just to our school systems, but we also owe that to the planning for our instruction for kids.
Thank you.
Mr. Vice President?
Yeah.
And just for the record, to respond, Member Baker, to your for the record, The department will pursue an exemption from ESSA, but given the specificity in the law, it might be highly unlikely, but we are willing absolutely to pursue that option for clarity.
Thank you.
Member Mack.
Vice President, core members, and along that line, I would also like us to consider how, especially in grades 3 through 8, the effect on move on when reading and how we're going to track student progress in all those areas as well, and how to align and with this very, very important measure.
Member Kay.
Go ahead.
I have a different topic, so, okay. Vice President Core, Superintendent Douglas. In a prior meeting when we changed the end count, I had requested information, the data to be run so that we could see what individual grades would have looked like with the 20 end count, and in light of the concern raised by the Assistant Superintendent earlier of Glendale Union High School District, I am still interested in seeing what sort of fluctuations may have occurred as a result of the change to the end count. So on the one hand, it may have allowed more schools to be measured, and at the same time, it may have made some, created some changes elsewhere, and I'd still have an interest in seeing that. In addition to that, I don't know if it's in a future meeting or if it's potentially in a study session, but I have an interest in what is happening with the school improvement process and where that is, what the department is seeing as they're out visiting schools, and what sort of progress we're making on school improvement. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Williams, I'm sorry. Member Burton, sorry.
Vice President Core, Superintendent Douglas, I have two requests of the department, and this can be in the January meeting. One is the status of ESSA implementation, and the second is where are we on per pupil expenditure reporting requirement. I requested that a couple of months ago, and I think it's school finance unit maybe is working on it, but it's something that will be required, and I just want to see what it's going to look like and how it's going to impact schools, and how ready are they to report this information. The per pupil expenditure for school report cards, which is required by ESSA. Yep. Sorry.
Anyone else? Director Williams?
President Core,
yes, please go ahead.
Just a mundane issue, just reverting back to Superintendent Douglas's request for a change in meeting dates in December. I just don't know how we're going to address that, and leave it to Director Williams to handle how we're going to make sure we could have a quorum on the change date, and want to accommodate it if possible.
Thank you, President Narducci. Yeah, Director Williams, a doodle poll, how are we going to try to arrive at a date where we know quorum will be established?
So, Vice President, core members of the board, Superintendent Douglas and I spoke about this last week when we were at Wested. Currently on the calendar, it looks like December 17th would be the best. So if board members are able to meet on December 17th, which would be Monday, Superintendent, is that still okay with your calendar? Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm sorry.
And for staff, we will
That's
make
good.
sure we can make that work.
Okay. So, Vice President, core members of the board, if December 17th works for you, if you want to send me an email. I know some people it already does not work for, but I also know a couple others that it does work. So then what I will do is I will, once I know about quorum, then I will send out an email potentially in like a Friday update. Mm-hmm. Big bold letters, action needed, please review, about the change. And it does, changing it a week later, it does allow for certain committees like the K-3 Literacy Ad Hoc Committee. Member Welborn, I'm looking at you. We can do some good work with our reports. So I do have a question for Member Baker because I just want clarification with what he discussed. Member Baker, when you're discussing we do not know what we're shooting for next year, when you talk about data and instructional practices, are you just talking in regard to menu of assessments, or are you speaking of the 1819 A through F accountability system?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Member Baker, when you were discussing that you did not know, or schools did not know where they were shooting for next year, such as the data, using instructional practices to improve practice, were you speaking of the menu of assessments or the 2018-2019 A through F accountability system?
Both, actually, but I was specifically addressing the apparent reality that schools must go through the disruption of using a different test, even if they are satisfied with AZ Merit.
Thank you.
But we don't know what that test is going to be, and it does not appear that we will be able to choose AZ Merit. So if schools wish to continue with AZ Merit, they really do not have a choice. They're going to have to change.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
All right. Well, with the last words, I will thank my colleagues for their grace as I muddled through the agenda. I appreciate your patience with me. And with that, I will call this meeting. I will adjourn this meeting, not call this meeting. I will adjourn this meeting at, let's call it 1:55 p.m. Thank you very much.